Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Business Karaoke Podcast. Today, we have Catherine O'Connell with us, and I had the pleasure actually of meeting Catherine O'Connell, firstly, in her role as Vice Chair of the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. That being said, once I got to know a little bit more about Catherine O'Connell, I found out that she's actually a very long book of stories and experiences, and her vice chair role is only one of those hats. So what we're going to do today is go through and talk about all those different experiences that Catherine has and the value and the unique experiences that she's had in Japan. Catherine, I couldn't be more happy to welcome you to the Business Karaoke Podcast. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Brittany. It's wonderful to be here and be one of your guests. Thanks so much.
No, of course. So before we get into the real reason why I wanted you on the podcast, which is obviously not only your incredible experience in building networks and communities in Japan through your involvement and activities with the Chambers of Commerce in Japan, but also your outstanding, and for me personally, absolutely outstanding and inspirational title of being the first female in Japan to open up her own solo legal practice. I'd just like to ask you, how are things, this COVID-19, everyone's kind of locked up. I know that you've been able to match some of your masks, to your outfits and to your hair and things like that. So you've been very, very active, but also very fashionable and safe. Tell us a little bit about how COVID-19 is going for you.
Thanks. And just on the setting up a practice, I recently found out that there was an American woman who established a practice a few years ago, about 10 years ago, in Okinawa. So my claim to fame is now that I am the first to have established as a female in the
Honshu.
mainland.
Right? Yes, in Honshu, absolutely. And definitely first New Zealander as well. So we'll add that in there as well.
So COVID-19, well, it's been rather interesting, let's just say that. But for me, I just continued. I mean, I was already working at home, and so working at home was not an affront to me. I could do that, right? I work from home, I have a home office, and I go into clients' offices and help them. So it was my clients who were then forced to be working from home. So one of the first things I did was actually teach some clients how to use Zoom. So it wasn't chargeable hours. It was just, how do you get around using Zoom? And then the other online tools. So that was one thing. And then suddenly, I had a couple of big clients. One was in the airline industry, and of course that happened. Yeah. And so they were struggling, and I decided that if they needed me, I would just hold their hand through this. And so the contract was ended with them, but we continue to keep in touch, and I'm hoping they're going to come out the other end. Right. So there are big clients like that who had difficulties with technology and also with just COVID crashing everything. Then there were some other smaller clients who I have a lot of SME size clients who are facilitators, coaches, those who run Airbnb, for example. And they also had difficulties, right? They couldn't go and be in front of people. They couldn't open up their places to stay. No one was coming to Japan. So those sorts of things affected. And therefore, if they affected the clients, they affected me. But I also felt it was really important to be a very strong support mechanism in the community. And I found that my legal skills and my experience and my sort of maturity, I guess, in my age, if I might say, was really useful to help people to try and get through this. Right. And so I became a kind of sturdy tree and felt like my, people I was helping were the little branches going off the tree and getting nutrition from what I could give them. So I joined a group that's online for entrepreneurs and was participating in that. I did a presentation on contracts to help people sort of try and think about their contracts and legal stuff while this was going on. Maybe they had some downtime to do that. So COVID is really, it's just been a whoosh. There was sort of that first month of, wow, this is interesting. Then it was going to continue. And I think we're still living with it now. So it's called the new normal. Some call it next normal, right? Some say, let's get back to real life. But actually, this is real life. And it's going to be real for a while.
I love that. It's very true. People are kind of waiting for normal or waiting for it to become normal again or what they knew. But it's really about what you've been able to do, which is to recognize that things have changed and then to kind of help out and create value where you can. And as much as you are very much a lawyer, and that is where you are right now, my opinion, or my when I first met you, you could have told me you would have that you did anything, and I kind of would have believed you. That I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. I just would have believed you. You have this ability to connect with people, and I think that's, as much as this is that you're a lawyer now, that kind of wasn't how things started, which for me isn't surprising at all, because your passion, your knowledge, but also deep empathy for people has enabled you to build what some people, if you looked at it on paper, what would look like maybe a non-linear career path, actually you've made it to look very smooth, a very smooth transition. So as much as I can't wait to jump into the story about law and what you're doing right now, I'd love to take a little step back and think about those formative stories and that first connection to Japan, because you, unlike many others, have a deep empathy for the Japanese people and are also fluent in the Japanese language. And this isn't something you develop overnight. So can you talk to us a little bit about those, what we call kind of early days in Japan?
Sure. I mean, Japanese language learning was really probably pivotal in making everything that I am now, and everything that I experience and do. And I certainly don't think I would be in Japan if I didn't have a good understanding of language. And so when I left school, Christchurch, New Zealand, I was really not that keen on going straight to university. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But tourism sort of popped into my mind. And of course, New Zealand's very famous for its tourist spots. So I actually went off to a technical institution, like a polytechnic, and found out they had a tourism course and a language course in Japanese. So I remember coming home to mum and dad and saying, well, I'm going to study Japanese. And they were like, sure, okay. There was no sort of, what are you talking about? Japanese, what's that about? I was really bad at French at school, so they probably wondered what was going on. But I did that, and I started in a class. It was a full-time for 2 years doing Japanese, and I ended up coming top of the class, which was something remarkable. I think if you put your energy in and really love something, it shows you how far you can go. And with that, during that, I also won a speak Japanese competition, and had a first trip to Japan, to Nagano, to Kuramayama Kogen, and they were holding a New Zealand fair during the summertime, and so I got my first experience of the heat in Japan, even in the mountains, right? But also, interacting with people. I was assigned to a restaurant where I would serve Japanese food, so I got to know a lot about Japanese food and how to say, deliver the food and be, a server. And that was interesting, really interesting. And so after that, I worked with Japanese people in New Zealand doing tourism activities, being a tour guide full-time, taking people around Queenstown, Mount Cook, going on glaciers, bungee jumping, doing all that sort of activity. And I think that's where perhaps you're talking about empathy, it starts, because you have to communicate with people in order to have them come along with you and understand and be engaged with you. And so you're spending 5 hours on a bus taking people down the countryside. You've got to have stories to tell, and you've got to be an interesting personality, right? So I used to try to think of many things to be able to do, that initiative, using that initiative to sort of come up with creative, interesting things to talk about.
Right.
And of course, as you know, I like to talk a lot, as I'm now. So from there, I left doing tourism to go and do law, and there's a connection there with the Japanese tourists I was tour guiding, sort of giving me inspiration, because they asked a lot about law topics for New Zealand. How do laws get passed? What happens if someone gets into trouble in New Zealand and they end up in court? Those kinds of things. And I had to go away and study about law in order to sort of build up that repertoire for the tour guiding. And that got me very interested in law, actually. And that's why I ended up working through that and going back to university and studying law and coming out then and working in a law firm that they wanted a Japanese speaking lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
So you must be thinking, what kind of, tourists do I have on this bus, and what kind of travel are they planning on, on creating in order to
They were Shinkansen, right? Some of them were Japanese Shinkansen who were lawyers, and so it was quite interesting. And those sorts of things, quite a few of them were lawyers. So it was great.
And if we look at one thing that I've found particularly impressive, or that's particularly taken my interest regarding your career, is that you've been able to gain trust of large traditional Japanese organizations as kind of their face. So very much when you're kind of the foreigner, gauging whatever, you are in a Japanese company, sometimes you're just the translator or, whatever that is. But your career through the companies and through the organizations that you worked for, you actually were able to develop this role where you kind of became the face or the mouthpiece for an organization. And for me, that I know kind of the backstage of a Japanese company, and I just know the level of trust and patience and relationships that's required in order to build that kind of position. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it's like, or how you went about building those relationships inside the organizations in order for them to say, okay, Catherine, off you go. Here's our legal objectives. We trust you. Please go and fulfill them. Can you talk to us just what that experience is like?
Well, I think sorry to interrupt. A lot of that is built up as you're interviewing for the positions, right? And so first position in Japan was Olympus, and I was interviewed in Sydney for that before I came over. And I think, again, they test your Japanese language capability, but it's not only the language itself, because Japanese is tied up, as you know, with so many cultural aspects, and being able to convey that you not only can speak the language and do it in with outside of being a textbook kind of Japanese speaker, but be able to understand the culture enough to make them understand that you're going to fit into their organization. You're going to be able to sit with people beside them, right? Not in some ivory office tower like typical lawyers do, but sit down right with the business people in the legal team and be able to communicate and be a good partner with them and be a colleague, right? So that's where it first starts, from the interview process. And then once I'm on the job, I think all due respect to all of the traditional Japanese companies who have lots of traditional Japanese men working for them, they all, and without a doubt, all respected the fact that I was a lawyer. So the feminine or female sort of thing didn't really come into it. It was the ability to be able to treat them as a normal person and them me. And so I think we had a lot of respect. And I do have a sense of humor, so I actually utilized that as one of my secret weapons. And so when we would go for drinks after work, or when we were in the office, although it was a serious topic, I would always try to find something that was an interesting or a humorous, using humor in a very distinctive way to make sure that people felt comfortable, right? So I think to say what you're saying is that they expected I would be a lawyer and that I would give good legal advice. That was a given because of my title, my qualification.
Right.
And I knew that I was a Japanese speaker. So I had to sort of just show that I was more than that and could be their buddy and hold them through anything, because I understood their culture and I could bridge between what they were thinking to their counterparts who may be foreign companies, and try and bridge that, not as a translator in language terms, but as a cultural business translator.
Right. And I've found that to be through this series, and also personally, the real difference between people that have been able to go to Japan and they roll out a company initiative and they go back and it was all very successful, versus the people that were able to implement structural, organizational, transformational change, has really been those people that have been able to go in and, as you said, just begin with, okay, my qualifications and who I am is not the end, rather it's the beginning, right? And you mentioned that going and sitting with your colleagues is one of those things, and then also being able to develop an element of, social connection, be it going for drinks and things like that. Do you have any other moments or stories that come to mind where you thought, actually, maybe this is an important thing for me to do, or maybe you saw someone do something in particular that stood out to you and you thought, oh, wow, that's something I'm going to pick up on?
I think I was really just observing how Japanese companies worked and how they did their communication within the company. And so much of it is not written down or in a guidebook or there's company rules, right? There's employee rules. You should do this and can't do that. But there's no real way of how to actually get things done in Japanese companies.
That's so true. The guidebook is opposite in a way, isn't it? A guidebook in Japan is just what you're not allowed to do. Whereas in the West, a guidebook is what you should do, isn't it?
Right.
It's an interesting insight.
So no standard operating procedures. How are things done? And you try and find that sort of book. And being a lawyer, we always look to how things are done, how they should be done. And that wasn't there. So I had to observe my Japanese friends in the office and see how they did things. And when I saw things that were perhaps different to how I did them or was used to doing them, I needed to sort of sit back a little bit and think about it. But at the first, I made so many mistakes, right? I came in as a law firm lawyer going into a business, and when you're an in-house lawyer, it's completely different. So I remember being told at the first few weeks of joining Olympus, you're not a law firm lawyer. You have to be an in-house lawyer. You need to be an in-house lawyer. But not having that instruction how to do that, I had to pick it up. So I had to observe and watch people, what they did, how they interacted with the business people.
Right.
And so
what did that mean then as an in-house lawyer? What did that mean? What were they referring to?
So they were referring to lawyers who could tell the law, right? Explain the law, but explain it through a business lens. And be able to say, instead of that book we were just talking about, don't do this, do this, it was about, okay, maybe we can't do this, legally speaking. What do we do instead? Or maybe the law is grey here. What can we do? And giving a business perspective to it and helping the business be able to move forward. And not be a no-sayer, not be the department of no, as often departments are known as, the department of no. Being the department of no but, or this is okay and we can do this, right? So looking for options to be able to turn it around into a business way of doing law rather than a lawyer telling you black and white what you can't and can do.
Right. That sounds like it takes a certain element of creativity as well, which is something when we start talking about, law and particularly Japan, the word creativity doesn't spring to mind, but listening to you and, observing your story and your development in Japan, certainly creativity is a large part of it. And my next thing that I was always wondering, particularly in your role, is was it difficult, or how did you manage that kind of balance of exactly what we're talking about, that this is the no, this is where we want to get. How do you manage that kind of that conflict between not just kind of having to stick by the rule book, but also trying to provide clients with value and not being that no, and then add a layer of that, very sometimes traditional, rigid Japanese structure? How do you find room for creativity?
Yeah, I think because they've employed you as a foreign lawyer, they want you to actually be delivering some change and doing things differently. And they want you to use that secret weapon of being a foreigner, of being a foreign lawyer, foreign trained lawyer, to actually deliver that creativity. So it's expected. But when it comes in the delivery of, well, have you thought about doing this? Or this is really ridiculous. Why don't you do it this way? It actually is an affront to them. And so although they want to embrace it, a change or creativity, the way it's delivered has to be done in a very, I guess, Japanese way.
Right.
So being careful to explain and encourage change,
Mm-hmm.
but also to be pushing it further forward, right? So, I mean, take compliance training, for example, that I deliver to employees, and I still do that in Japanese companies now. Your traditional way of delivering is really just telling the rules. This is what we do, this is what we don't do. Again, it's a repeat of what we've just said, but, the code of compliance, this is what it says.
Mm-hmm.
If you have some issue, you can call the hotline.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't really help people to explain, what actually happens and what kinds of cases there are. So I try to use as many practical examples. They may not be, obviously they're sanitized as to who and what happened, but examples of what things are happening, right? And giving examples is always such a good idea. And doing kind of a workshop sort of training rather than a delivery of a PowerPoint standing up in front of the room. Part of that's expected. So you do deliver that part of it because they're expecting a PowerPoint. But adding to that something a little different each time is how I think I deliver the creativity. Mm-hmm. So having an example of a case that might have happened, a harassment case, or somebody, shortcut on the rules, or they received a kickback from somebody, how would you deal with it in this situation? And then it hits home because it hits their heart and they have to think about it themselves if they were in that position. Mm-hmm. And it's also just not a hypothetical. It's something that either happened in that company or was something in a particular similar industry. And that's how I think you bring home some different ways of thinking about training, for example, just as one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the consistent theme from your days as a tour guide, through being an in-house corporate lawyer, through now being an entrepreneur in Tokyo, and also sitting on many boards, is really that connection for people and your ability to build relationships and be able to manage highly complex and also quite sensitive information. And if we talk a little bit about what's required if you're going to Japan. I've never done business in Japan before. I don't know anything about the Japanese psyche, and say I'm talking with my Japanese clients or my Japanese colleagues. What are some of those things that I should keep in mind?
I mean, there's some obvious ones that are, your business cards, having those ready, not, I left them in the hotel room, or, I forgot to put them in my suitcase. Mm-hmm. That is essential for doing business in Japan, is having a decent business card. Mm-hmm. These days we can't exchange them on, in person. So thinking of ways to be able to do that online as well. Mm-hmm. Naturally, coming to Japan, one of the biggest things I think you would know, Brittany, 10 minutes early is on time in Japan. So
really? Yeah.
Showing up to meetings 10 minutes early is actually respectful. Turning up at 10 o'clock for a 10 o'clock meeting is generally not really regarded as on time in Japan. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
So little basics like that.
Yeah, I have absolutely add here, don't underestimate the bureaucracy, i.e., you might need 8 minutes filling in a form at reception, who then they have to go and get a key to then take you up to the 9th floor. Like there's really that entire chain that we do need to certainly.
You're exactly right. And now there's other layers with this security and sanitizing of hands and letting certain number of people into the office. In the elevator going up, there's only 4 or 5 people allowed, as opposed to what used to happen with 20 people crowding in an elevator in Japan. That's one secret thing I'm actually quite happy about, is the small number of people in elevators. Yeah. But those sorts of things, right, they're in every textbook. So if you don't get those right coming to Japan, then, people will really think you haven't really done your basic homework.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? And then on top of that, there's just different ways of communicating within, knowing about a yes doesn't always mean yes, or that sounds difficult. You only hear that as an answer. That often means no, but not saying directly. And trying to pursue, well, how can we make it easy for you? Well, actually, no, it's still difficult. Yeah. Means no, right? So knowing that sort of thing, engaging someone like yourself who's a brilliant communicator and expert in Japan, other people who are consultants, to spend some money if you don't really know on how to bring yourself into Japan and get the basics at least done. The rest is going to be an unfolding project as you go through. but at least get the basics right.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Though just to tick off, and because showing whether you get it right or not is different. Just there's the idea that you've made the effort, and that's really
Maybe yes.
so important. And the Japanese are, I found to be, even if you do make mistakes, if you make them in a way that's well intentional, that often they'll see through that, because as you said, get back to the compliance. They're not, as much as people have this idea that the Japanese are very, rigid and rule-based, that's sometimes true, but there's also this incredible gray area of ambiguity that people are very comfortable in ambiguous situation. What I would love...
And you're right, making mistakes is a good thing, a good example. I mean, if you make a mistake in Japanese, it's actually fine. And you shouldn't be so worried about it. They become great stories later on, the mistakes you make, right?
Right, and then this is almost a perfect leeway or a segue to the next thing that I'd love to talk to you about, which is that transfer from you're this in-house trusted lawyer to actually, I think I'm going to go out and do this on my own. I've read your story, but for a few people that haven't had the opportunity to read how that came about, do you want to tell us a little bit about when, and also maybe even the significance of the timing as well, that when you decided, yes, this is the time, and maybe even also the business need for me to provide something new to the market?
Right. So when I left from a 5-year in-house head of legal position to go and set up my own practice, which I've got now, during those 5 years, I had a couple of employees start with me and rotate. But at one stage, I was left with nobody at the time, and it was a difficult period where I was about 2 months. I was by myself and didn't really have anyone to call upon to help me with the work, because there was a lot of work. It was great. We had a lot of good business, but I needed some support, but I had nowhere to go and find it. And if I say nowhere, that's not true, because I could find lawyers to come in and help, but they were expensive full-time law firm lawyers who, would charge a lot, and we didn't really have that budget. And I really just wanted someone to come in and help me for a little bit of time, every Monday morning or Wednesday afternoon, or something like that. An extra pair of hands. Yeah, exactly. So that's when the inspiration started for me, is why can't I find someone like this who could come in and help me? And that's the kind of business I have ended up starting, is that I do that kind of flexible, fractured lawyer, part-time lawyer person who I can go into businesses and have others go into business to help firms out who don't need a full-time headcount, but just need somebody to help part of the way. So it timed too with leaving my other company. After 5 years, you get a retirement payment. So that also was really important, because starting your own business in Japan, you do need to have some finance behind you. And so that payment allowed me to transition through to being qualified in Japan. And being qualified in Japan means qualifying as a gai kokuhou jimu bengoshi, a foreign registered lawyer, which is a paperwork, a paperwork challenge. But in order to do that paperwork, it takes about 7-8 months in Japan. So you need something to help you go through that. So, it was that combination of finding a niche in the market that was necessary, and also having the finance behind me, and that transition period of what was 2017 to sort of do the paperwork and get ready and build the business, build my website, all those sorts of things during that time.
I think that's so important, really so important. This idea of, okay, I'm going to jump, but I'm also going to do it properly, so I'm going to make sure that I take the right steps. And also, I was reading, and I actually had to laugh, because you mentioned that the day that you did finally get through the 7-8 months, that it really was just a piece of paper. It was just a signature. And you thought, oh, well, that's it.
The only exciting thing about it was that it was a yellow piece of paper. I remember taking a photograph of it because I'd never seen anything in Japan that was yellow as an
Yeah.
official document. So I still have a picture of that somewhere. So yeah, it was just a piece of paper. And then after that, the so-called ceremony was really a typical Japanese conference room at the Bar Association with the U-shaped square table with all the people sitting around it, and your name being called out. And because I was speaking on behalf of the foreigners being admitted that day, which, look around me, was only me.
I was going to say
that particular day. Sometimes there's 2 or 3, but it was just me.
There's not a lot.
Snowy winter's day in Tokyo, and so I spoke on behalf of myself, and did an oath to supporting Japanese lawyers in the community and doing my best, etc. And then it was out the door, like literally, thank you very much.
Fine.
And out the door. Whereas if you think of New Zealand or the UK where I'm qualified, it's wearing the wig, it's wearing a gown, it's going into the High Court or the Supreme Court, and there's a lot of ceremony about it. It's swearing on the Bible, it's with your family around you, witnessing, right, and another senior lawyer admitting you on and talking about you on your behalf. And in my case in New Zealand, I actually was the only one in my ceremony as well, because I was admitted after a trip to Japan, and I had to take the trip to Japan. So I actually got to speak to the judge in chambers specially. So my admission in New Zealand and the UK was very special. But Japan was very stamped the document and head outside. And I didn't even get this lovely badge, which is my Bengoshi badge, on the day. Everyone else got theirs, and mine was delivered afterwards. So I didn't even get the symbol of becoming a lawyer.
Why not? Where was it?
That wasn't ready.
Oh God! So
somebody didn't stamp the documents to get my one done.
So I'm laughing because for me, this story is almost very representative of my experience in Japan, which is they don't get kind of caught up in one isolated or unique isolated moments. It's very much this kind of long-term view, things like that. And we're Australia and New Zealand, we're kind of known for making kind of a bit of a fuss about things. What I'd love to know is, okay, so we have that behind us. You had this kind of anticlimactic moment, which, to be honest, I found the most transformational moments in my life have been exactly that. Like, you've been in a room somewhere, you've got an email about that thing you've been working on for 5 years. Congratulations, it's done. And you're like, what? In an airport or something, Yeah. So I've had very much very similar experiences. And I love that this is almost very Japanese in a way, that they're thinking, okay, now, well, let's get to work then. So what I would love to know more about now is, what's it like? What's the relationship with your clients like? How have you because you're not only selling something different, you're also selling something very new, like this idea of, guess what, you don't have to have a complete legal structure in order for you to keep a healthy legal business. So can you talk to us a little bit about what, past this anticlimactic moment, so we're assuming now's where the exciting stuff happens. Can you talk to us about your clients and what's going on now?
Sure, I will. But I just had this thought as you were saying about this transition and why we don't celebrate. I think Japan does celebrate up until you turn 20. So you graduate from kindergarten, you graduate from school, you have an entrance to school, all of those ceremonies
and all those things
are all very big. And then you turn 20 and you have your seijinshiki, right? You're coming of age. And then after that, there's not much celebration unless it's marriage so those kinds of events seem to happen up until 20. And maybe that's it, that we're adults now. We don't need to have to celebrate all these other bits. So that's just one thought that occurred to me. But in terms of business, so it is a proper legal structure in terms of it is a horitsujimusho, it is a law firm.
Oh, sorry, internally, so the company themselves, so they can rent you.
Yes, they can rent me. They can hire me. That's right. So in order to do the kind of business I am doing, I have to be under the structure of a law firm. So I am that. And so firms have heard about me through either word of mouth or they're the network that I've built over the last 17 years in Japan, basically. So people have known about me working in-house at various companies, Panasonic, Mitsubishi, other companies. And then it was really one of the large companies that I still work for now, Panasonic, a lawyer in Panasonic. I wrote to her saying, look, I've now got my own firm. I'm available. If you know someone, let me know. I'd love to speak with them about what I could do to help them on a part-time basis. I don't have to be a full-time hire. And she said, oh, I think I know someone. I can introduce you. And so we set up a coffee and had that. And then 2 days later, she rang me and she said, actually, I need someone. We've got a project we have to do. And I'm still working on that project with them because it is long term. So it comes from that kind of thing, right? So she would tell others about me. And I am indebted to her because she has introduced me to a couple of other people who have hired me as well. Or have enabled me to hire someone else when I couldn't do the work myself, was too busy and full, that I needed to, obviously, in order to keep the brand going and be responsible and able to service the market, right? You don't want to be too busy that you're not available.
Absolutely.
To be able to hire other people. So she introduced me there as well. So I'm indebted to her. So that's really it, is being able to work in the community, I think, not only through Chamber of Commerce, which is really exposure. It's not where a lot of my clients come from, to be honest. It's being able to be out there and leading and building a community and network, and it's from there that the clients have come to me. So I haven't really had to advertise or market. It's been word of mouth, and I'm grateful for that. But that's the strength of Japan and the community and building relationships.
Absolutely. And I think this is, I've obviously being, having met you through the chamber, that's so true, that you have this environment of people, like-minded, similar values, people that are usually in Japan for the longer term, that are concerned about, growing healthy businesses, but also relationships at the same time, and sort of have that balance between business and relationships. So if we think about that business and relationships, if you're coming in kind of as this ad hoc lawyer, what I would love to know is that what are the kind of things that you can do that enables you for people, and legal information is the most sensitive information, next to like HR information. Do you think it was maybe those early days in Japan, maybe it's even your relationship building through the chamber, that you've been able to go in and just earn that kind of trust just really fast?
Well, I mean, if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. So I follow through. It also is a pain for me, because if I promise something and I can't, I feel it extremely personally, and I will literally lose sleep about it. I hire a career coach, and we work on things like this to be able to not take things as deeply as that. But for me, it's really important to be committed. And so if I do say I'm going to do something for you, Brittany, and I don't, that's wrong, and it lets down my reputation, and I'm not going to be trustworthy. So I think through this period, from my upbringing really, and the way I was brought up, but also through Japan enhancing it with the culture here, doing what you say you're going to do. If you don't think you can, then don't hold yourself out for that. So being able to go into businesses as well and saying, I can help you do this. And sort of, sometimes we call it helicoptering in, right? If a company has a lawyer who's left the business, they've got no lawyer there, I can promise you I'll go in, I'll take on the daily work, I'll do that project, which is setting up a contract space, I'll do that other investigation and do the other investigations as they come up, compliance investigations, and I'll do all the other work. And also I'll go and sit on your board and help you and be somebody. I may not know every single thing about your business, but I can help you. And because I've been there and done that myself. I've been in-house before, so that's how I can help. So not sure if that answers your question, but it's building the
absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. And delivering on what you promise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is those elements. And I think that's it. That's a translatable lesson for people that, aren't necessarily lawyers as well, just people that are working in Japan. One service of yours that I found particularly innovative and creative was the idea of kind of like a legal health check. Because one thing that I find, not being in the legal field, but being a foreigner operating a business abroad, ignorance is absolutely no excuse. There's, I owned and ran a business in Germany as well, so I'm very aware about tax implications, and things like that. And so the idea that you can take something as complex as law, and that you can break it down into kind of like bite-sized pieces that people that aren't necessarily law fluent can adopt. I found that to be a really great way to step forward, to move forward. Can you talk to me a little bit about that kind of that legal health check idea, and you've been able to support small to medium businesses as well as entrepreneurs expand to New Zealand and expand in Japan. Can you talk to us a little bit about that service and that?
Yeah, sure. That's right, and it's something that has always been there in my business, but during COVID-19 and the businesses who were struggling, it was an offer that I put out there. And I also thank Custom Media for setting up a platform where they allowed businesses to, promote what they were actually doing through this period. And through that, I was able to help some clients who, sort of, first of all, curious to know what is a legal health check. Mm-hmm. You think of it as the equivalent of you going into the doctor and having a medical each year. You're assessing your body. Is it in shape? Does it need some exercise? Mm-hmm. Are there parts of it that you need to work on that are okay, that are sort of working, but you need to fix up? Have you gone deep dive and found out all the other things that are lurking there that may be holding you back from being a really good, healthy-bodied person? Mm-hmm. So in the same way, it's a legal health check is a deep dive into just taking a picture of the business right now, what things are working well, what things are not. It can be a bit, for some people, a little bit scary, like going into a health check is. If you've had, wine the night before, it's going to show up, that sort of thing, and that those contracts you've entered into that you may not be, that are in the cupboard and you have never looked at them. So it's looking through all the contracts, which ones are alive, which ones have expired, which ones do you still need, which ones are old and need revamping. Right? Which ones are out of date now because they haven't had updates to various changes in the law, privacy being one of them, data privacy being a big one that's often not covered in contracts now. That kind of contractual stuff, right? And that also expands into how the salespeople doing their business and contracting, and also procurement side with due diligence and bringing on suppliers. So those sorts of things, governance. So it goes into all kinds of different aspects of the business. It's not simply a checklist. Of course, there's a cover sheet, which is checking off the different things that have to be done, but it's deeper within that, much as it is with a health check in the doctor's surgery. You take the blood, you take it away, and you find out what the components are within the blood, the cholesterol, right, sugar, etc. So it's finding a bit more into granular aspects of the business where you can help, and then coming out with a plan. So there are things that are okay, green light, don't need to do anything about them, keep doing them. Yellow, amber light, what can we do about these things? And red. And just doing a roadmap for getting you better into a more healthier company in a legal perspective. So that's just one of the things that I do for businesses. And the beginning can be rough because it's hard to sort of acknowledge.
Right. Gets messy before it's there in a way, doesn't it?
And then coming out at the end, though, right, and having a roadmap to going further and getting better. And I think everyone wants that at the end of the day.
Right. And I think it's so much that, exactly as you said, that at the beginning, not everything's going to be a red light. You're going to have some green lights, but let's also look at, we're going to have some amber lights, we're going to have some red lights as well, and let's address those. One thing that I've found particularly relevant in Japan is that ability to have someone like you. Legalese is difficult anyway, right? Speaking legal is difficult in any language, and then to have it, in a different language as well, to have, a trusted person like you on your side that you can say, okay, you understand, what's going on in my business in New Zealand, you understand what's going on in my business in Japan, and that ability to be able to walk me through what it means for both sides of my business, I found to be so important, that it's actually only ever been something for companies, huge companies that can afford these huge international teams. It's been kind of Panasonic, like you said, Olympus, these huge companies that have had these, walk in with sort of 50 lawyers idea. But we've seen now more and more, particularly over the last 10 years in Tokyo, we've seen more and more foreigners through, relaxed visa, or making it a little bit easier to set up businesses in Japan, things like that. We've seen there's more and more foreigners that are setting up businesses as well in Japan. What would we, for those businesses, those small to medium businesses, those entrepreneurs, how would they also benefit from a health check?
Right. So, I mean, some of them are starting out and don't know what to do first. And so somebody who's had experience like me can set them up with just some thinking around what they might need to think about first. Right. And just get them thinking about setting up, for example, solid base of contracts to get them going. Right. So if they're going into discussions with somebody, and it's kind of confidential what they're doing. They may have a new invention or some tech that they wanted to protect, having a confidentiality agreement and understanding, not just having the document handed over, sign it, understanding what that actually means, what they can do with that document, how it's going to protect them, how it's not going to protect them as well, right? So starting out in that way and having someone understand, because any promise that you are making to a counterpart has to be wrapped around with a document, really. So anything that you are doing in your business, I want to sell you this product, you're going to pay me this. That's a promise, and a promise is a contract. So that's put it in its really basic terms. But helping people start to think about the legal stuff they need, as they might do going off to see an accountant and checking out their financials.
Right.
So a legal health check at the beginning might be they've got some documents or they've got a few bits and pieces, but how they can set themselves up properly and think about down the track what they might need as their business grows.
Right. And
oftentimes I may not have the startup come and see me, but I'll have the SME that's been in business for 3 or so years and didn't quite get those legal ducks lined up at the beginning. And so helping them go through that.
Right.
It's a good way to reflect is before they go forward.
And that's so much what it is. It's that idea of, because you're limited, you have limited resources as a small to medium enterprise. What you want to do is that you want to, when you invest, you want to make sure that you get the best bang for your buck. And that's really like someone like you that understands both, the cultural side of business, that has a business acumen, but also is very much a qualified, capable lawyer. It's really in that kind of situation that I see. If you're a small to medium enterprise, you have a limited budget, that's where I would invest, in that person that can kind of, wear those many hats, at the same time. And if we think about moving forward, that we're now seeing new businesses come to Japan, and we're also seeing new, like you mentioned, we mentioned about compliance or regulation, or even if you're building a new business or if you're in a new industry. What we've seen is that contracts and Japanese government regulation, often there's a gap. Often there's a real gap, and we see very viable businesses in Japan kind of a little bit stuck by government regulation. How do you navigate these kinds of situations where you've got a viable business, but that kind of Japan Inc. says no? What are some of those things that we can do as small to medium businesses to still capitalize on the viable business, but also still stay very much compliant with the law?
Yeah, well, no generally means no in Japan, right? And so that is very difficult. And I guess for Japanese law firms who deal in Japanese law, that's a hard thing for them. But I do work with Japanese law firms who don't have foreign lawyers working with them. And so I can locum into those Japanese law firms and actually assist them in thinking differently about their clients, and especially if they've got foreign clients or clients based in the US, for example, or Australia, New Zealand, who need help with their base in Japan. So that's one way I can help. And you talk about government. One of the big, obviously, hot topics right now is the Japanese hanko, right, the seal. Right. And that has been, it's 100 years of tradition in Japan. And every document must have that in order to be, correct and signed and authentic and legal. And this has been really disrupted through COVID-19. And even the government last week on Friday issued guidelines to get rid of the hanko. so that contracts could be signed in different ways by showing an email path, right? The difficulty was people having to go into the office even when it was shut down through the state of emergency, right? So this is now changing, and we're even seeing the government realizing that some of these rules around documentation and has to have a seal now doesn't really have to have a seal. There is one technical issue there with the Civil Procedures Act. It actually says that they have to have a seal because it makes the document authentic. So there's a little bit of technical work to be done around that before we start racing off and stop income.
Throwing away
not throwing away the income. Let's just wait for a moment while we sort out that actual just technical legal aspect. But there are ways of changing. And there are ways to change and lobbying the government. And it is very useful, and this is how through the ACCJ I've leveraged this, is being able to, as a business owner, speak to the government. You can write letters to the government. You can tell them what you're thinking about certain aspects. And this is what's happening right now with this re-entry into Japan, the ban that's happening. And there's a bit of activity there with the chambers and the European Council to get some activity and let Japan know that the future of Japan's success also rests with foreigners like us working here, especially those who are committed with family and have PR. So there are ways and means to try and change the government. It is slow, but once Japan's hand is forced, such as working at home through this whole experience, the hanko, everything like that, Japan does change quite fast.
Yes,
actually. It flips very quickly once it's forced. It does take time though. So I don't have an absolute answer for that question, but I think it's a process in motion. And Japan is actually through this, I don't know, silver lining of COVID-19, if we can call it that. Things have changed. 70% of people in Japan don't want to go back to work, want to work remotely. That was in the Japan Times today. You know, these are great things to hear. Things will change in Japan out of this.
Right. And one of the reasons that I wanted to create space for these kind of conversations is because there's no real answer. There's no real right. There's no real wrong. But when I think about sustainable, meaningful impact, I think about people like you, because it's not going to be the people that come in and say, get rid of hanko and that's it. And they don't understand anything about the context. They don't understand anything about what it means to then implement those changes. They don't know what it means. Okay, what is it going to look like at City Hall on Monday? What are we going to do at the Shiakusho? What is it really going to look like?
Yes.
So when I think about the future of Japan, I don't think about this kind of innovation that we come in, digitalize everything, and then kind of leave. That's not the idea. What I really think is that to leverage people that understand how we got here. You know, what have the last 10 years look like? What have the last 20 years look like? What have the last 25 years look like? Why are we here, right? And then also to use that as a base to think, okay, which of this is meaningful to take forward? Which of it is not serving us anymore? And how do we move forward? So if we think about that kind of next step for you and even your industry, what does that look like for you on the horizon? What are those kind of things that you see that you think, okay, that's going to be the next step? What's that for you?
Well, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is employment of not only women but men, and in my industry, lawyers who have gone to raise families and they want to come back into business, but they're not able to do the full-time work at a law firm and at that pace. And maybe even in-house, they can't do a full-time role. And so I want to look out for lawyers, especially male and female, who want to work differently. And I'm hoping, and I have a good feeling about the outcome of what's going on now, is that people they've been at home. I've talked with dads who have just loved being with their kids during this. They haven't worried about children appearing on screen. They're very much more happier, and they've got a sense of wellness. And so wellness and the way you work is my drive for the next meantime. I want lawyers to work more happily. A healthy lawyer is a happy lawyer in my book. And that's also a motivation for what I'm doing. So I want to help and bring more people who are lawyers on that path with me, who want to work differently and flexibly, right? So that's probably, for me, that's where I'm seeing it. And I'm hoping that with this change to, as I just said, the statistic before, 70% of people want to continue teleworking, right, working remotely. How can this be something that I can leverage and that others can leverage to actually change the way they work? So that's what I'm looking forward to in the forthcoming future. Yeah.
I love that because that's really what it's so much about, and I think that this is really where foreigners or people who think differently or work differently, having a certain empathy for the Japanese culture, understanding the Japanese language, being able to communicate, and then also being able to see through in those transformational procedures. I really think that's really going to be where, when we do think about redesigning the normal, then the new normal, that's really going to be where we're going to see that change. And if we think about we've covered so much in this hour, and I'm always so appreciative of the time that you take, because you've had such an incredible, you just have such an incredible story, about how, as much as it looks like on paper that it's not necessarily linear, it's just really, as I said at the beginning, it's really been able, your ability and also your intelligence and your empathy has been able to make that transition just so smooth. We've learned about what it means to have a legal health check for small to medium businesses, and why that even if it's scary, we should do it, because we don't want, it before it's too late. We've learned about what it means to be a real partner, what it means to build trust in an organization when you're dealing with highly sensitive information, and also dealing, directly with people. We've covered so much. If we also look at, and we haven't even gotten to, the other myriad of things that you do, particularly when it comes to the boards that you sit on, particularly women in Japan, or the women in law in Japan, and your also for the British Chamber of Commerce, the American Chamber of Commerce, and you as the Vice Chair for the Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. If we think about how we can, or small to medium businesses can maybe even just leverage or even better connect, because I think as we do have this opportunity to connect more, but I think that your story about even the way that your law firm is structured, I think it does highlight that there is a possibility for small to medium businesses to get involved or to benefit from those larger networks. How would you encourage a small to medium business owner to get involved in their wider community, like you so incredibly have?
Well, I love it, and I'm passionate about building relationships, because that's where my book of business comes from. But it's also what gives me pleasure in life, is to have connections and have relationships. And I say that easily, but I mean it very deeply, because connecting with others is how I'm able to learn more about myself and the needs of other people, and be, you talked about empathy before. So I would suggest that people actually get involved, and that means really getting involved. Many of the chambers, BCCJ and ACCJ, have SME roundtables. They've just started one at BCCJ, so you can get involved there. ACCJ has one as well. And there you can participate, you can join. They are now being held online, so it's possible to join these and speak up. My motto is never join a meeting unless you say a question or make a comment, and that means anything online or in person. So always have a question and have some comment ready that you want to ask about to get involved, and just participate. When we all went online, some people went quietly into the corner, but I thought it was a good time to actually show up and be a leader in the community and share that ACCJ, ANZCCJ, and BCCJ limelight. And I take my position very seriously in those chambers, and to utilize those and actually leverage. And so now is a time to be extremely creative. You can get speakers from Australia, New Zealand, America, who you couldn't normally get, right, to come and be online, and you can leverage and ask anyone to come and collaborate with you. So if you're going to moderate an event or set up an event, I really want people to think more around that kind of way, how they can do things differently, and then take an idea and actually do something with it. It's hard work. You have to do it in time where you're not actually getting paid for it, right? There's a lot of effort and volunteer energy required, but it's actually well worth it, because you learn about yourself, you learn about ways that you can be a leader, you build confidence. We all need those as SME owners, I believe. So rather than shrinking back, I would say get involved, really participate, be authentic, build your relations in a genuine way. And that's how, as an SME, you will succeed possibly even more than large companies can do.
Yeah. That is, and I couldn't think of a better note to finish on than that, is to show up and to provide value. And that's really going to be the next way forward. And as you said, that who knows, if SMEs do a really great job redesigning this new normal, well, guess what? Maybe we create a new normal perfect for SMEs and big companies have to fit in around us. So on that note, Catherine, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for your time. We've been so lucky to have you. And whenever you're opening your next initiative or your next project, please come back and tell us all about it. We'd be so happy to have you back on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much. It's been wonderful speaking with you. I really enjoyed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.